The desperate call, the crimson glow of dying stars painted the void in shades of desperation. Admiral Kes Valdron stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Stellar Sanctuary, watching as another world burned. The massive viewport showed the fourth planet of the Vega system being consumed by an endless swarm of metallic entities. Each machine was no larger than a shuttle, but together they formed a living nightmare that devoured everything in its path. "Admiral, we've lost contact with Colony Base 7, reported his communications officer, her voice barely steady. Lieutenant Moras' usually pristine uniform was stained with the exhaustion of 72 hours of continuous battle. The Devourers have completely stripped the outer settlements." Valdron's forearms moved across the command console with practiced efficiency, his elongated fingers dancing over holographic displays. The Zephyrians had evolved on a world with lighter gravity, giving them tall, graceful forms that seemed almost fragile. But their minds were sharp, their technology advanced, and their hearts filled with the same courage that had carried them to the stars 3 millennia ago. "Status report on the evacuation fleet," Valdron demanded, his large, silvery eyes reflecting the tactical displays. 60% of the civilian population has been relocated to the inner colonies," came the reply from his tactical officer. "But Admiral, at this rate of consumption, we have perhaps 18 hours before the Devourers reach critical mass." Critical mass. The phrase sent a chill through every being on the bridge. Once the Devourers absorbed enough matter, they would begin exponential replication. One system would become two, two would become 4, and within a standard year, they would consume the entire galactic arm. The Devourers had appeared without warning 6 months ago. Emerging from the dark space between galaxies, they showed no interest in communication, no pattern beyond consumption. They simply arrived at a system, began dismantling everything from asteroids to inhabited planets, and used the material to create more of themselves. 12 star systems had already fallen, billions of lives lost, the greatest military minds, and the galaxy had thrown everything they had at these machines, only to watch their fleets be torn apart and recycled into more enemies. "Sir," called out the sensor operator, "we're detecting massive energy signatures. The Devourers are beginning to construct something large near the system's primary star." Valdron's blood ran cold. Intelligence suggested that when the reached sufficient numbers, they would begin harvesting stellar energy directly. Once they tapped into a star's core, their replication rate would increase 1,000-fold. All remaining ships formed defensive perimeter around the evacuation convoy. Valdron ordered, "We buy them time, whatever the cost." The bridge crew acknowledged the orders with grim determination. They all knew this was likely their final stand. The Zephyrian fleet, once the pride of the Galactic Defense Alliance, had been reduced to 47 vessels. They faced an enemy that numbered in the millions and grew stronger with each passing hour. "Admiral," Lieutenant Mora spoke up, her voice carrying a note of hope. "We're receiving responses to our distress signal." Valdron felt his heart skip. The distress signal had been broadcast across all known frequencies, a desperate plea for aid from any civilization capable of faster-than-light travel. The message was simple. An ancient enemy had returned, and if they were not stopped here, they would consume everything. "Put it through," Valdron commanded. The main display shifted to show a star map with incoming transmission vectors. Red dots appeared, indicating responding vessels. The Andorian Republic was sending a battle group, but they were 6 days away. The Crystalline Collective offered technological assistance, but their ships were purely defensive. The Void Runners promised to share intelligence. but admitted they had no weapons capable of harming the Devourers. Then a new signal appeared, much closer than the others. The computer tagged it as originating from the outer system, just beyond the asteroid belt. "Unknown vessel, identify yourself," Valdrin transmitted. The response came in accented galactic standard, the voice carrying tones that marked it as from a species with vocal cords rather than the harmonic resonance chambers most spacefaring races possessed. "Admiral Valdrin, this is Captain Marcus Chen of the human vessel Horizon's Edge. We received your distress call and are requesting permission to assist." Valdrin's tactical officer quickly pulled up the species file. Humans were a relatively new addition to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Their technology was considered primitive by most standards. Their military capabilities limited to their own small sector of space. They had a single representative on the Galactic Council, more as a courtesy than from any real political power. "Captain Chen, we appreciate your response, but this is a Class Alpha extinction event. Our projections show the enemy force consists of over 2 million autonomous units. You should maintain safe distance and prepare to carry word of our fate." To the Council, there was a brief pause before the human responded. "Admiral, with respect, we've been monitoring your engagement for the past 6 hours. We have some ideas that might help." "Ideas?" Valdrin almost laughed, but the sound would have been bitter. The greatest strategic minds in the galaxy had been working on this problem for months. Computer simulations run on quantum processors had explored every possible tactical scenario. What could one small ship from a primitive species possibly contribute? Yet something in the human's voice gave him pause. There was confidence there, but not arrogance. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had found a solution to an impossible problem. "Very well, Captain Chen. Transmit your suggestions. Actually, Admiral, we'd prefer to demonstrate. We'll need you to pull your fleet back to a safe distance and give us a clear approach vector to the enemy formation." Valdrin studied the tactical display. The human ship was indeed small, roughly the size of a courier vessel. Its design was functional rather than elegant, with none of the flowing curves favored by more advanced civilizations. It looked, frankly, like something built by a species that had barely mastered interstellar flight. "Captain, I cannot in good conscience ask you to sacrifice your lives. These machines have destroyed fleets 100 times your size. Admiral, trust me on this one. Sometimes the best solution comes from a completely different perspective." Against his better judgment, Valdrin found himself giving the order. "All ships fall back to defensive positions around the evacuation convoy. Give our human friends a clear field of fire." The Horizon's Edge began moving toward the Devourer swarm with surprising speed. Whatever propulsion system the humans used, it was more efficient than their ship's appearance suggested. The small vessel accelerated past the reformed Zephyrian fleet, heading directly for the center of the enemy formation. "What are they doing?" Lieutenant Mora asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Valdrin watched as the human ship dove into the heart of the Devourer swarm. The machines immediately converged on this new threat, their adaptive weapons systems locking on to the intruder. Plasma beams and matter disruptors filled the space around the human vessel, creating a deadly light show that should have vaporized any ship in seconds. But the Horizon's Edge moved like nothing Valdrin had ever seen. It twisted and rolled through, the weapons fire with impossible precision, its movements seeming to anticipate where the next attack would come from. The ship's defensive systems weren't particularly advanced, but they were being used in ways that defied conventional tactical Doctrine. They're not fighting back, observed the tactical officer. They're just ... dodging. The human ship continued its insane dance through the swarm, drawing more and more devourers away from their primary objective. The machines, programmed to eliminate threats, couldn't ignore such a blatant challenge to their superiority. Then something extraordinary happened. The devourers, in their eagerness to destroy the human ship, began firing through each other. Their weapons, designed to dismantle matter at the molecular level, proved just as effective against their own kind. The swarm began to thin as the machines accidentally destroyed each other in their attempt to hit the elusive target. Incredible, Valdrin whispered. They're using the enemy's own weapons against them. But the human ship was taking damage. Its shields flickered and sparked as enemy fire found its mark. The vessel's movements became less fluid, more desperate. It was clear that whatever the humans were planning, they were running out of time. Captain Chen, Valdrin transmitted, your shields are failing. Withdraw immediately. Not yet, Admiral. We need to draw them into a tighter formation. Almost there. The human ship made one final, impossible maneuver, spinning through a gap in the devourer formation that seemed barely wide enough for a fighter craft. The machines, now thoroughly enraged, compressed into a dense cluster as they pursued their quarry. Now, Captain Chen's voice crackled through the cum. The horizon's edge suddenly stopped its evasive maneuvers and began transmitting something. Not on any frequency Valdrin recognized, but somehow every devourer in the swarm received. The signal. The machine stopped firing, stopped moving, and simply hung in space as if listening to something only they could hear. What are you transmitting? Valdrin asked, fascination replacing his concern. A logic puzzle, came the reply. Dr. Vasquez figured out that these machines follow strict logical parameters, so we're giving them a paradox to solve. The effect was immediate and devastating. The devourers, faced with a logical impossibility, began to shut down. Their lights dimmed, their movements ceased, and one by one they went dark. The massive swarm that had threatened to consume the galaxy simply stopped functioning. In the silence that followed, Valdrin stared at the tactical display in amazement. Millions of enemy units, defeated not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by a simple logic puzzle transmitted by a species the galaxy had dismissed as primitive. Admiral, Captain Chen's voice came through the cum. We could use some help with repairs. That was a bit more exciting than we'd planned. As rescue ships moved toward the damaged human vessel, Valdrin realized that humanity's entry into galactic civilization was going to change everything. They had just demonstrated something that all the advanced technology in the galaxy couldn't achieve: the ability to think in ways that conventional wisdom said were impossible. The war against the Devourers was far from over. But for the first time in months, Valdrin felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope, the unexpected solution. Alina Vasquez pressed her palm against the cool metal wall of the horizon's edge as the ship shuddered under the repair drone's work. Her dark eyes studied the data streams flowing across her portable workstation, analyzing the devourer units that had been recovered from the battle site. Around her, the ship's cramped laboratory hummed with activity as her team worked to understand exactly what they were dealing with. The neural pathways are fascinating, she murmured to her assistant, Dr. James Park, who was examining a deactivated devourer unit under a molecular scanner. These machines don't just follow programming, they're actually thinking, but within very specific parameters. Captain Chen floated into the lab, his magnetic boots clicking against the deck as he reactivated the gravity field around his feet. The past 18 hours had been a blur of repairs, debriefings, and increasingly urgent communications from various galactic governments. Word of humanity's success against the Devourers had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to know how a small exploration vessel had accomplished what entire fleets could not. "Alina, we need to talk," Chen said, his weathered face showing the strain of command. "Admiral Valdron is requesting a full briefing, and the Galactic Council is demanding immediate access to our anti-devourer technology." Vasquez looked up from her work, pushing a strand of graying hair back from her forehead. At 45, she had spent most of her career studying first contact scenarios and xenobiology. Her specialty was understanding how different species thought, how their minds processed information and made decisions. It was this expertise that had made her invaluable when the Devourers first appeared. "Marcus, we need to be careful about how we present this," she said, gesturing to the deactivated machine. "What we did wasn't really a technological solution, it was psychological warfare." Captain Chen raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The Devourers aren't just machines," Vasquez continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when lecturing at the academy. "They're artificial intelligences, but they're constrained by their original programming. They can learn, adapt, and evolve their tactics, but they cannot think outside their core logical framework." She pulled up a holographic display showing the machine's neural architecture. "Look at this. Their thought processes are incredibly sophisticated, but they're built on pure logic. They cannot process contradictions, cannot accept paradoxes, cannot think in ways that violate their fundamental understanding of reality. So the logic puzzle we transmitted was specifically designed to create an irresolvable paradox." Vasquez finished. "I call it the humanity paradox. It's based on the old philosophical question: can an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it? But we tailored it specifically to the Devourer's understanding of physics and logic." Dr. Park looked up from his scanner. "The beautiful thing is that the more intelligent they are, the more devastating the paradox becomes. Their own analytical capabilities work against them." Chen nodded slowly. "And this will work against all of them. That's what we need to find out," Vasquez replied. "The Devourers we faced here were scouts, advance units. According to Admiral Valdron's intelligence, there are much larger formations heading toward the galactic core. We need to test whether our solution scales up." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Captain Chen to the bridge. We have incoming transmissions from multiple sources." Chen sighed. "Let me guess. Everyone wants to know how we did it." "Actually, sir," came the reply, "it's more urgent than that. Long-range sensors are detecting massive Devourer formations moving toward the Centauri system. They're requesting immediate assistance." Vasquez and Chen exchanged glances. The Centauri system was home to over 3 billion beings across 5 different species. If the Devourers reached it, the casualties would be unimaginable. "How long do we have?" Chen asked. 48 hours at current speed. "But sir, these formations are different. They're much larger, and they're moving in coordinated groups." Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine. "They're learning. The Devourers who survived our first engagement must have transmitted data about our tactics. The next wave will be prepared." Chen activated the ship's internal communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We're moving to engage a much larger Devourer force. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to develop a new approach. Whatever we used before, they'll be ready for it." The next 36 hours passed in a blur of calculations, simulations, and increasingly desperate brainstorming sessions. Vasquez worked with her team to develop new paradoxes, new logical traps that might confuse but every simulation showed the same result. The machines had adapted. Their programming now included safeguards against paradoxical inputs. "We need a completely different approach," Vasquez announced during an emergency briefing. "The Devourers are expecting us to attack their logical processes. We need to do something they can't anticipate." "What do you have in mind?" Chen asked. Vasquez pulled up a new set of data on the main display. "Humans have something that no other species in the galaxy possesses: our ability to think irrationally. We can hold contradictory ideas in our minds simultaneously. We can believe in things that make no logical sense. We can make decisions based on emotions, intuition, and pure instinct. And that helps us how? Because," Vasquez said, her voice rising with excitement, "we can create strategies that are genuinely unpredictable. Not just random, truly chaotic. The Devourers can analyze any logical system, but they cannot predict genuine human creativity." She began outlining her plan. Instead of one ship using a single strategy, they would coordinate with the defending fleets to create a battle plan that defied every principle of military tactics. Ships would move in patterns that made no strategic sense. Weapons would be fired at empty space. Communications would be sent in languages that didn't exist. "It sounds insane," Chen said after she finished. "Exactly," Vasquez replied. "That's the point. The Devourers will try to analyze our actions, looking for the logical purpose behind every move, but there won't be one. We'll be fighting chaos. With chaos, the plan was put into action when they reached the Centauri system. The defending fleets, led by Admiral Valdron's reformed task force, were initially skeptical. But as the Devourer formations approached, they had no choice but to trust the humans' unconventional wisdom. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. Human ships performed random barrel rolls while singing ancient Earth songs over open channels. Zephyrian vessels fired their weapons in complex geometric patterns that spelled out poetry in long-dead languages. Crystalline collective ships transmitted mathematical equations that were deliberately wrong, creating beautiful impossibilities in the fabric of space-time. The Devourers, faced with actions that had no logical purpose, began to malfunction. Their programming, designed to analyze and counter any threat, simply could not process the sheer randomness of human creativity. They flew in circles, trying to find patterns that didn't exist. They fired at targets that made no sense. They attempted to counter strategies that were changed every few minutes based on the whims of human imagination. "It's working," reported Admiral Valdron, amazement clear in his voice. "The Devourers are. They're shutting down. Their formations are breaking apart." Vasquez watched the tactical display as millions of enemy units simply stopped functioning. They had been defeated not by superior technology, but by humanity's greatest strength, the ability to think in ways that made no sense to anyone else, including themselves. "Alina," Chen said, placing a hand on her shoulder, "I think you just changed the balance of power in the galaxy." She nodded, watching as the last Devourer units went dark. "Marcus, I think we just proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the biggest gun or the smartest computer. Sometimes it's the ability to be completely, utterly, and beautifully illogical." As news of the victory spread across the galaxy, humanity's status changed overnight. They were no longer the primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. They were the species that had defeated an impossible enemy through the power of creative thinking. The Galactic Council would never dismiss human ideas again. But more importantly, the galaxy had learned something valuable about the power of thinking differently. In a universe where logic and reason seemed to rule supreme, humanity had proven that sometimes the most profound solutions came from the most unexpected places. The human heart, the creative spirit, and the willingness to embrace the impossible. The war against the devourers was over. But humanity's real contribution to galactic civilization was just beginning. Asterisk.